Good evening, everyone. Today's session is on arrays in C language. So basically, array is a data structure in which we can store our data. So the property of array is like it is um, a collection of data items. Like I'm taking a data of 10 elements, right? And then I'm going to say that these would be my 10 elements. Like I'm going to define those 10 elements in the array. So the only constraint with array is it contains the homogeneous data types, right? Like if you are holding the data type, if you are holding the items in the array, elements in the array, that would be of same time, right? So that means it is a similar collection of data types, right? So here, and it is very important, like we should whenever we start with an array, we should know like how to access the array, how to traverse in the array. There are number of functions that can be performed on an array. An array is a very useful, it is basically easy to use data structure, but it has its own advantages, it has its own disadvantages as well. So let us understand the arrays concept. So here we have the first part. What are the different types of arrays? There are two types of arrays. One is single dimensional and second is multi-dimensional. Now whenever we talk about single dimensional, it might be like your 1D array, one dimension array, or it would be multi-dimension array. That means it would be 2D or 3D or ND, means n dimension. Like you can have number of dimensions in an array. So let us understand the first one, then the second one. So here we have already discussed, like there are two types of array. First is one dimension and second is multi-dimension, or you may say 2D array or 3D array, 4D array, or n dimension array, right? Now let us understand how to declare an array in C language, right? So you have the data type. First you need to define the data type. Next is the name of the array, and then in square brackets, always remember this thing, you are enclosing the array size would be defined in a square bracket, right? And like what will be your size of the array? Like my array would be holding 10 data points, right? So its size would be 10. Or you might be having, like it is because it starts from 0 to 9, so you can say if it would be 9, right? So here let us understand like how we store the values and how it we access the value. So here data type would be any type of data. It could be int, it could be char, it could be float, it could be double. It means like your data type could be anything. Means like here when you are storing the elements in the array, right? Like suppose I have defined it as int. So this could be like integer values. All the 10 elements would be holding the value that is of integer. If I am defining as float a 10, that means it would be defining all the elements of float data type, right? It is not like this one is integer and another is data, another data type would be different, another element would be different. No. So here it is a homogeneous collection of data. So that means all the elements of the array would have the same data types, right? So next is the array name. Like it is user defined name. It is an identifier itself. Whatever, like there are certain rules to define the names also. Like you cannot start with the number while defining an array, and it should be start with a like lowercase, uppercase, or underscore. So that the rules that we follow in identifier, that we apply to this part also, right? In array part also. Next is what is array size. Array size is how many number, like how many elements you have in your array, right? What are the number of elements in the array? That would be the size of the array. So here, like suppose I have defined int 10, int a 10. That means it is holding the 10 elements, and you basically define these elements using the comma, right? So here you are going to define the 10 elements. Now in the second part we have the float. Float value means like you have the float data type and the array name. So again here you would be defining the data items that have the same data type, that would be of float itself. Another, you might be having a character of 20, that means a string, a group of characters that would be treated as a string in an C programming. So here we have like, let us take one example, int a5. So you have, let us understand how it works and how it basically uh, access the element of the array. So here we have defined a5. A5 means our first index will be starting with 0, and I told you it is the index would be starting from 0 till the last element, like 0 1 2 3 4, because 5 we have the size. And here this would be your value, means it would be a container, and in this container we are putting 1, in another container we are putting 2, and so on, right? But here you are, because it's a homogeneous collection of data, all the data are of same type, and it is like whenever you define the 5 space, so 5 contiguous memory is allocated for the number of data item. It is not like that ki you have stored one element here and then somewhere else where you find in the memory somewhere else. No, it is a contiguous allocation of memory, right? So here the first array name, like I would say my array name is a, right? So here you would be writing a0, right? The first element index would be a0 and the value would be your 1. The second element is 1, right? And the value is 2. Then the third value is uh, 2, right? So the array index would be 2 and the value is 3. Then we have a3 and the value is 4. Then a4, the value is 5. So these are the index that we refer, because if we want to access any element of the array, we can access it with the help of index, right? So let us take another example. We have integer 5. So here itself, like here we have not defined it. If we want to define it, define the various data items of the array, we can define it. First value would be 78 and the index would be 0. The second element is 1, 2, 3 and 4. Right. So here there are three things. Always remember, when we have an array, we have three things. What are those three things? The first is the address, the second is the value, and the index. Right. So here, like we have defined A. So here this would be my first index A0. Right. Then A1. Then A2. And this would be my values. Okay, and like in memory, again I am telling you, because it's an integer, it takes 2 bytes, right? So your memory address would be like this, 52. It is a contiguous memory allocation. The next address would be 54, 2 bytes. Next address would be 56. Next bytes will be 58, and next byte will be 60. Right? So it is basically what? It is contiguous allocation of memory. Here we have all the data elements that are stored continuously, right? So hope you have understood like how they have stored the three things. The first is the address part, the second is the value or the element you are going to store, and you might be noticing this thing, all the values are of same type, like all the values are integers. So remember this thing, it is very important, because whenever we access any like whenever we talk about arrays, they are basically homogeneous collection of data, because homogeneous means similar type of data, right? Similar type, that doesn't mean ki same value. Type of data means, if you are storing a integer, if you are declaring an integer data type, all the elements would be integer. If you are declaring it with float, all the elements will be having the data type that is float. Okay. Now the next thing is, here we have the next thing. Let us explain this thing here. Int is the data type, a is the name of the array, 5 is the size of array, right? So here, what is the data type? The data type is int. It stores only the integer values. The second thing is the name of the array is A. The size of the array is 5. So it means array can contain only 5 elements of integer type. So this is what, like, this is how we declare it, right? At the same time, when we declare it, we are initializing the array with some elements as well, right? So let us move into the next part. Note. Index of an array starts from 0 and the size would be to -1. Like we have seen, our size is 5, right? So here the last element would be your -1, right? So here, that is 5 minus 1, that would be 4. The last index would be 4, right? Next we have is, it means index of an array starts from 0 and the size would be -1. That is, the first element of an array will be stored at A0 and the last element would be will occupy a A4 space. So here we have the first element index would be A0 and the second and the last element would be A4, right? Next part will be your initialization of an array. Initialization of an array means, like, we are having how to assign the value to an array, right? After an array is declared, it must be initialized. So you have declare an array. Here you have declared it. This is called declaration. This is called initialization. Initialization means you are basically putting the values in the array, right? So here what we are going to do is, there are two types of declarations. You can initialize the array with the help of two methods, right? You initialize it. Declaration has been done also, right? Declaration is already done here. We have declared it. But there are two ways to initialize. Initialize means you are having an array, right? This would be your space, right? So how to enter the values in the array? There are two methods for initializing the values in the array. The first, after an array is declared, it must be initialized, otherwise it will contain the garbage value. Right now here, it could be a compile time initialization, like this. We have initialized at the same time, like this, right? And the second one is your runtime. We take the input from the user, right? So let us understand both the methods. The first is compile time array initialization. Compile time initialization of array elements is same as ordinary variable initialization, right? Like you have done it just now. Data type, array name and size, right? Size, and then you put the list of values here, right? Here suppose I am taking a data type int, marks is the array name, and it consists of 4 values, right? So from 0, 1, 2 and 3, because our index would be like this. And then if you want to define a float value, you can define it like this. If you want to define a integer value, uh, you may define it like this. So this is partial initialization. Still some elements are still left. You can do so, right? But you cannot do so like this would be my 0, 1, 2, 3 and 4. At the same time you are giving the values. It is basically giving, it will be giving you an error, like if you are using that part, right? So you can initialize the value at the same time. Yes, it would be possible in that case. So here what you have done, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So your size is already 4, right? 4 means 0 to 4. It is always n minus 1. That's why it is going to give you an error. It should be what? It should be like this. 0, 1, 2 and 3, because I told you your index would be starting from 0 until n minus 1. N is what? N is your size of the array. Whatever you have mentioned, 4, 5, 6, whatever you have mentioned it here, that is n minus 1 data index, right? This would be your compile time initialization of arrays. Let us understand the runtime initialization of array. An array can also be initialized at runtime. using scanf function. You can take the input from the user itself. So this approach is usually used for initializing large arrays. Like suppose you want to take the input from the user, rather than initializing the specified value, you can use the this method also, right? So here we have included the header file. Then we have declare one array of 4 elements, right? Then we have taken I and j as two values. Then after this, now you have this part. Let me tell you. You have this part. You have 0, 1, 2, and 3, right? And your value is like this. Okay. Now if you are taking the input from the user one by one, like 1, then 2, then 3, and then 4, so like you have to write 4 times the same statements. Rather than writing the 4 times, you can take it in a loop also. You can take the values using the for loop. So what you have to do, the same thing, the scanf statement will be printed 4 times to take the input from the user. So it would be like this: for I is equal to 0, I is less than equal to 4, and I plus plus, right? And then you have taken the statement, that is scanf percentage d ampersand array I, right? So here you have at the same time you have taken the input from the user itself, right? And then again for printing the values, printing the elements of the array, what you are going, the same procedure. Here you are not going to use the scanf function. Here you are just printing the array. So and here always remember ampersand, array name, and I is what, first time it would be 0, so your first index a0, second time it would be 1, 2, 3, and when it is 4 it becomes false, right? The same is for printing the array elements also. Take the run this loop for 4 times, and need not to have an ampersand sign, because this is not a scanf statement. This would be your printf statement for printing the values on the screen, right? So this is how we have taken the input from the user, and then we have printed the values on the screen, right? So here we have seen like how we are taking the input from the user, and in the second statement we are printing the elements of the array on the screen. Let us take another example, that is calculate an average. You have taken the first marks, and there are number of marks would be your 50. You have allocated the array 50. Then you have initialized the sum, and now what you have done, you have taken the size, like you have maximum size of the marks would be 50. Like you can take 50, right? How many marks you can take from the user, that is maximum limit is 50. Now what you are going to do, let us like I'm not going to put all the marks. I am going to take 3 subject, 4 subject. So the size of the array is basically defined by the user. So here what we can do is enter the size of an array, scanf, that is ampersand n, and then we take the input from the user, that is like suppose I have entered 3, so I will be taking the marks, enter the number, that is 3 times I am going to take it. So my marks would be like this: 0, 1, and 2. 0, 1, and 2, right? So here you have taken the input from the user, ampersand sign you have to use it, right? And then after it you are at the same time you are adding it in a array itself, right, in the loop itself. So here what you have done, you have add all the values which are taken by the user. So you have taken suppose 3 marks, you are adding them at the same time, and then you are going to print it the sum. sum of marks in the sum, and if you want to take out the average, because n you have taken from the users, so that's why we have taken it as n. Otherwise it would be like, if it is a constant number, you might be using 3 4 like this. If you have decided like what is my size, so what will be the output, like how it is going to work? Enter the size of an array, that is 5, right? Then you have taken the 5 numbers, right? You have taken the 5 the marks of 5 subjects. Then you have taken the summation. Then you have calculated the summation, and then after that take out the average out of it. So how you are going to take out the average? The sum you have already calculated divided by n. So here your n would be 5, so it is going to give you the answer like this. Now one thing very very important, you have defined the average as integer. So when your answer is printed on the screen, it is not going to take the decimal point value, right? It, because it is not declared as it as a float data type, right? Because it is not declared as a float data type. Now let us see, we have seen number of examples of a one dimension array. Let us see what are the advantages of using the C arrays. Code optimization, less code to access the data. Yes, because we are traversing, we are basically writing few lines of code and entering, storing the values in the data structure, right? At the same time, in a contiguous memory allocation, there are different disadvantages also. We will be discussing upon that also. Then is ease of traversing. Yes, it is very easy to traverse in the array. I told you, like with the help of for loop, you can access the, or you can say that print a0. So this, my index is a0. One value will be printed on the screen. So it is very easy to traverse the array as well, right? To retrieve the elements of an array. Ease of sorting. Yes, because there are very a few line of code for sorting that part, for sorting the elements of the array. Random access. You can access any element of the array. You can access any element of the array. Like directly putting, I am directly putting A as 1. So yes, I am accessing the array element that is at index 1. Right, now let us see what are the disadvantages. First of all, let me tell you, these are the advantages, like whenever we have random access, traversing an array, easy to use, and basically the disadvantages, fixed in size. So might be possible, like I have taken the size here in this program as 50, but I have stored only 3 values or 5 values, right? So what about the other thing? Because I have initialized that, I have declared that array with 50. Now how I am going to access that part, that is very important. So it is wastage of memory, like I am accessing only the few values. The later values would be, the later space would be, like you may say, it is wastage of memory. So whatever size we define at the time of declaration of the array, we cannot exceed the limit. So it does not grow the size dynamically like linked list, when we learn later. So like here we have a contiguous memory allocation and all the data members are stored like this. We cannot have like heterogeneous collection of data as well. Like here the most important thing is, you are storing the elements in the array in a continuous position, right? And your size would be fixed, like I have given 50, or I have given it would be like n, but n I need to mention it, right? So at the same time it is going to allocate the space of in the memory. So if you are putting only 3 items, these 2 items basically have allocated the memory, but it is not assigned any value. So yes, it is wastage of memory as well. So let us see some of the applications of array in C. In C language, arrays are used in a wide range of applications. Few of them are as follows. Arrays are used to store the list of values. We have seen, if we want to store the number of marks, we can do so. We can store the number of like heights also. If we want to store the student's height, we can use the array data structure. The second application would be Arrays are used to perform matrix operation. Yes, very very important feature, because our images are basically stored in what, in a matrix format itself, right? And you can perform different functions on matrix as well. Metrics are used to implement search algorithms. Yes, there are two search algorithms that we usually use, that is linear search and binary search. Then we can have multiple, we can implement the sorting concepts, or we can implement the sorting algorithms as well, like you have insertion sort, bubble sort, selection sort. There are number of multiple sorting techniques which can be implemented with the help of arrays, right? So arrays are used to implement the data structure. Yes, because we are storing the values in the memory, right? And how you are storing the values in the memory with the help of this data structure, that is called array, right? So here, yeah, one more thing, very very important thing, like you can store the you can use the stack data structure using array. You can implement it with arrays also, you can implement it with linked list also. And the second is, you can implement the arrays with queues also, like queues can also be implemented with the help of arrays, right? So there are multiple techniques, there are multiple applications using arrays. You can implement those, right? Then arrays are also used to implement CPU scheduling algorithms. So whenever we want to like use FIFO, or there are number of techniques, SJF, there are number of techniques which we can implement using the arrays concept. So array is basically a data structure which is, yes, it has its importance, it has its own advantages, as well as it has its own disadvantages as well. We are not going to deal with that like only the array has advantages. No, because array is widely used and it is a very easy to use method. There is no need to have a complex data structure. It is just a simple few lines of codes are used to store your data items, and that too using the any of the method, that is compile time or runtime method. You can use any of the method for storing your values, storing your marks or storing your values, right? So yes, it is very very important data structure we can use in our programming concept. So in the later session I will be telling you about more about two dimension array as well, because just now we have completed the one dimension array in which we can store the values in only one dimension, right? Like you have the number of values, you can store your marks, you can store your height, you can store your weight, you can store anything. But the only compulsion is, like, all the elements of the array should have the same data type. Like if I'm going to store the marks, it would be of like all the values would be of integer. If I'm going to store float, all the values would be holding the decimal point number. So this is how it is going to store the values in the array, right? So that's why it is homogeneous collection of data, right? So hope you have understood the session, and hope you understand how we use arrays, how we, like I have taken two examples, like how we are going to implement the array concept using programming, right? So hope you have understood the session and hope you